We are talking Chelsea, and of course this is a story, Simon, that seems to grow arms and legs on a daily basis. Roman Abramovich, has he really moved the goalposts here in the Chelsea sale at this late stage? What is going on? We're trying to pick through the bones of it all. The sale of Chelsea reportedly has hit a serious obstacle over fears that Abramovich is attempting to renege on his promise to write off a debt of £1.6 billion. So, Simon, when we break this down, you heard Steve Forbes in his bulletin there. Yeah. Is it as serious as we think it might be? Is he really calling the debt in? And is it going to have any impact on the club takeover? Just before you answer, Simon, I was talking to somebody close to the deal this morning, and he said Todd Bewley, the preferred bidder, is right across it, all over it, and more this morning.
Well, the sale and the proceeds, to some extent, are two different things, and I'll explain that in a second.
Yeah.
First and foremost, the goalposts were somewhat changed. When Abramovich made his observation, ignore the rights and wrongs of this, right? Abramovich made the observation that he was going to gift the money and write off his loans prior to sanctions. Yeah. And I think he felt that that would create the relaxation of the government sanctioning him. So then what happens then afterwards is he gifts away the football club, doesn't receive any of the money back, but the government still sanction him. So I think he's smarting from that. You now look at the deadline date. First of all, if you draft a licence, and you can change the commercial terms in the licence, and you can change the date. All right. So the date of the 31st, whilst it is a deadline that they would like to have you complete this transaction on, because clearly Chelsea needs to change ownership because the funding mechanisms, they've already changed the licence once to allow Abramovich to drop in another 30 million quid to be able to fund the players' wages. Right. They can change the deadline.
And it's not a hard deadline.
It's a hard deadline, but like everything else, if they want to change it, in the same way they amended the commercial terms to allow them to achieve revenue coming in from away tickets, to allow them to do this, they can change the date. Now, of course, you've got a June 9 deadline that everyone wants to understand what the league looks like, because the league composition is ascertained on June the 9th. All the league shares are given to all the 20 clubs, and away you go with the formation for the Premier League. Now, of course, the backstop today is if Chelsea weren't to be part of that, then you just take the non-promoted playoff team into the Premier League and use the fixtures that Chelsea weren't able to complete. So you can find a solution to everything. Now, here's how the transaction will work if Abramovich is playing hard and fast with how this money is distributed. The government will step in and exert executive control over the disposal of Chelsea Football Club. And it will be sold to someone else at market value, which we cannot argue that 2.5 billion or 3 billion is at. The proceeds will then be taken, dropped into a ring-fenced environment where no one has them, and the argument will then happen about what happens to that money.
But the club will be safe.
But the club will then go on under new ownership. Now, if Abramovich turns around, here's the thing that people have got to factor into their minds. Abramovich can turn around and say, I'm giving this club away for nothing. Then there'll be no proceeds to argue about, no distribution mechanism to go to the Ukrainian War Fund or to whatever else, no busy, saucy sods, by the way. And I know you don't like to hear this because you gave you an interview yesterday. David Dean's got no business putting his nose into how the distribution of the money of this transaction goes. Roman Abramovich has paid so much money into English football. So many players have paid tax as a result of the wages he's put in. He's probably paid for grassroots football 10 times over. So he doesn't really need someone like David Dean popping up and saying, actually...
There was a suggestion from David Dean. He wasn't telling him what to do with it.
It's muddying the water and creating a landscape around the transaction that everybody was happy with Roman Abramovich's money being poured into Chelsea for 20 years. He's not asking for profit. He's really asking for the money back that he put in a football club that everybody was happy for 20 years. So he does have some moral point about that money coming back to him. But of course, under sanctions, it cannot. So here we are now saying...
Yeah, but nonetheless, Abramovich is backtracking. He's backtracking on his original promise to write off the 1.6 billion.
With the feeling that he might get away with sanctions.
If we're going to be fair to the situation, Abramovich made that observation before he was sanctioned. And I'm willing to wager you that he believed... that if he made that offer, I will dispose of Chelsea Football Club and I will step away from the biggest asset that you need to protect, i.e. this cultural asset, if you don't sanction me.
Right. He thought the government would relax the sanction.
So they sanctioned him. Yeah. So now he's being sanctioned and also they're going to tell him what to do with the proceeds. Right. So he's now sat there. It's not a difficult transaction. Of course, he's trying to find a mechanism to repay some ideal behind this 1.5 billion. And there's also the argument that if he writes off this 1.5, this is a bit more complicated. If he writes off the 1.5 billion worth of investment, that means he's got 1.5 billion worth of capital losses, which he can then use to shelter any capital gains that he's got. So if he's bought a house for 50 million in London and he sells it for 100 million, he's got 50 million worth of capital gains.
He can't sell the house because it's been sanctioned.
When he can, at some point, he's going to be able to. Right? At some point,
yeah,
he will
further
be able
down
to.
the line.
So further down the line, he'll sell his assets, right? And if there's a big gain in it and he's got 1.5 billion worth of losses, he can shield the tax on that. So he'll be getting proportions of that 1.5 billion back by mechanisms of being able to shield his gains against the losses he has in Chelsea. But the big thing for Chelsea fans is the government are in a situation where if Abramovich is playing hardball, is getting irritated with the dynamics of, I thought I was going to avoid sanctions, that's why I made this offer. I'm not going to listen to people pop up out of the ether telling me where this money should go to, like David Dean or other voices that are trying to influence the government. I'm not going to have that.
It was a suggestion from Dean.
But hang on, the way that we build this through the whole show yesterday, our media strapline was the government are going to redistribute money to grassroots football. That wasn't being billed under the auspice of a suggestion. It was being billed as a headline as how it's going to happen. So if you're Abramovich sitting there going, well, hang on a second.
Yeah.
I've agreed to do this, but not under the terms of how everyone else decides. So what will probably happen is Abramovich will either back down and accept the ramifications of no proceeds going where he wants them to go.
Yeah, because it can be under Abramovich's terms.
Or the government will say, like they do, there's many properties in London that have been owned by very well-known despots, right, that have been disposed, that the government still own, that have never been returned to those particular despots, whether it was Gaddafi, whether it was other people. There's highfalutin properties in St James's that HMG, Her Majesty's government, have still got and are actually charging rent on for people to occupy those buildings, and they don't even own it. So what will happen is, most likely, is the deal will go through, whether it's Jim Radcliffe that's thrown in a curveball, whether it's most likely Bowley, they pay the proceeds, it goes to the government hold it to order, and they have a fight with Abramovich about where the proceeds go at a later stage. It go nowhere near Abramovich.
What do you mean, hold it to order?
They hold it into a frozen account, into an escrow account that sits in there.
It just sits.
Sits there. And it can't go anywhere until an accord is agreed with Roman Abramovich. He can't have it. The Ukrainian War Fund can't have it. The Grassroots Football Foundation can't have it. The government can't have it. It sits there. But what it does is it frees up Chelsea and the buyers of Chelsea to buy the asset. Now, the government have got to invoke some form of CPO, compulsory purchase order, to get executive control. But it will be within their gift to do it. And if they have to do it, that will be the exit strategy. So what we saw yesterday on Sky News was a reporting of a deadline ticking away. Don't worry about that. The deadline can be shifted.
That's got to be. Abramovich has been outflanked by our government, hasn't he?
Yes. Abramovich believed, incorrectly, in my view, that he felt that if he offered to allow Chelsea to go for nothing, he wouldn't be sanctioned.
Right.
From his point of view, he's got a double whammy. I'm giving you back a cultural asset and I'm going to write off 2.5 billion quid. And on top of that, you're going to sanction me as well. Hold on. Now, you can understand, not agree, you can understand where his mindset's coming from.
So say Todd Bewley gets the club.
Yes.
And the money changes hands, and as you say, sits there.
Yes.
Sits there.
Doesn't matter, Todd Bewley.
The government's going to have... Abramovich is going to have to do a deal with our government.
Yes. Or it just sits there. It sits there, and the Ukrainian War Fund doesn't get any benefit from it. Abramovich gets no benefit from it. The money sits in a locked environment, and Abramovich can launch whatever legal assault.
But that money can't sit there forever, Simon.
It can do. It can sit there forever and ever and ever until a solution is found. I just gave you an example. I can tell you of property in St James's that was owned by a
Gaddafi and others.
That has been owned at a £100 million business that HMG government has got there that are renting out. It's not theirs to rent out.
So what about the reports this morning that Chelsea's future is under threat? No, it's not.
No, it's
affected.
It's affected. That's the right analogy. And the fact that what Carvey was reporting yesterday, the clock is ticking. Yes, it is on the 31st. We know what deadlines mean. They're a call to arms. They're a call to action. In an ideal world, you complete by this date. Because, of course, on June the 9th, what happens is the league shares is given to all 20 clubs. And then the fixture list comes after that. And if Chelsea aren't in a situation where they can continue, because someone has got to pay the wages. Someone's got to pick up the tab. Abramovich was allowed by an amending of the licence to put in... why would he do it? Put another 30 million quid in to pay the wages. Why would you do it? You've been sanctioned, and people will say, rightly so, because you're a Putin supporter. Okay, we can argue whether he is or he isn't, but he's certainly a product of Putin's regime, and he's benefited financially.
Yeah.
He is, to some extent, some form of robber baron because of the revenues he's got out of Russia under Putin's regime. But here he is now, and here Chelsea are now, and that is why the government... And the government shouldn't have, to some extent, a dictation about how much he sells this club for. Because he can turn around tomorrow and say, I'm giving it away for nothing, and then there are no proceeds to distribute
But
anywhere, are there?
that's what I was going to say, Simon. What if
Yeah.
he does do that, writes the debt off, gives it away for nothing? He could easily be paid through a third.
Who's going to do that?
He's not going to, though,
If
is
you're
he?
Todd Bowley and that little gang, are you really, in any shape or form, going to want to give any kind of illicit payment to Roman Abramovich because you got the club for nothing? First of all, you'll find yourself in nick.
Exactly.
Second of all,
Yeah.
you'll be in serious commercial trouble.
Right.
Full stop. So no one's
Right.
going to do that.
So the sale of the club is not impacted, it's affected, but it doesn't stop Todd Bewley getting his hands on it.
Unless there is an inability, which I do not believe will be the case, for the government to exert an executive control. They've sanctioned. A sanction doesn't facilitate something, it stops something.
Yeah,
The sanction stops the money going anywhere. The next step is, okay, if you won't sell this, Abramovich, because it's a private limited company, we're going to assert some executive control to be able to sell the business, not determine where the proceeds go, because that isn't our gift, but we're going to hold the proceeds until we reach an accord with you. And if that means we'll see you in 20 years' time, nobody gets the benefit of this money,
Sure, listen,
and that's
people,
what we'll do.
people are keeping up with you in this discussion. I've got to say, Simon, hats off to you, because nobody is across this better than you. When are we going to be in a situation where we can say, Abramovich is gone, Bewley's a man?
Well, look, I mean, they've got a 31st of May deadline, and there are lots of reasons why that 31st of May deadline exists, primarily because the season finishes in and around that time.
Yeah.
Secondly, because in a week's time, the league needs to be able to evaluate who are its members, i.e. who they give the league vote to each year, because each year 20 clubs get their league share. So all of that from an ideal standpoint.
Sure.
But all of it has a fallback, because if Chelsea are put in a fixture list and their fixtures are drawn, and let's say, for want of better, Nottingham Forest get knocked out in the playoff final, then you just swap Chelsea for Nottingham Forest to complete the fixture list of the Premier League. But it won't come to that.
No.
What you've got is bidders at the table. The government wants to sell the asset, and Abramovich just needs to be managed through the situation. And if he won't blink, and if he doesn't blink, then the government make him blink by taking executive control, and that is what will happen.
Sure. Brilliant. Okay, Simon. It's Chelsea. Chelsea's future not under threat. That's too strong. But certainly, the sale is affected by what is going on behind the scenes, and it'll be up to the government and Abramovich to crack out some kind of deal. All right, we're coming up to 10 to 11.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app, and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.